Good evening. My name is Bren Cowell. I am the Director of Public Affairs at the Zionist Federation of Australia. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I speak, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Knowing that this conversation is being watched across Australia, I also acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands on which people are watching this. During the past 2 weeks, our attention has been focused on the violence and tension that took place in Israel and Gaza. Our minds and our hearts have been with those in Israel facing the sirens, the rockets, and the loss. Today, across Australia, our communities have joined in solidarity with Israel in hopes for peace and in affirming Israel's right and obligation to defend itself. Tonight, we are shifting gears somewhat. No doubt the conversation will go to recent events, but there's also so much more to discuss with tonight's guest, Dr. Ruth Calderon. Ruth is a former MK for the Yesh Atid party and was Deputy Speaker of the Knesset. In fact, whilst in Knesset, she visited Australia as our guest in 2013. She is an educator and a Talmud scholar who promotes the Hebrew language, Jewish culture, and the study of Torah in the secular world. She founded Midrash Elul in Jerusalem and Alma, the home for Hebrew culture in Tel Aviv. She is a profound thinker, commentator, and author with a doctorate in Talmud from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Tonight, Ruth will be in conversation with the ZFA's current chair of Aliyah, Philip Chester, who, whilst ZFA president, hosted Ruth when she came to Australia in 2013. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Phil.
Thank you, Bren, and you've actually stole my thunder because I was going to explain a few things about the relationship that I established with Ruth and why I'm so excited this evening to be able to have a conversation with Ruth together with many people in Australia, Ruth, and all around the world who religiously check into our lockdown learning sessions, which have been very, very successful. As Bren put it very well, things have been very difficult in Israel. You've just been through a very, very difficult couple of weeks before the recent ceasefire. And we've been following it closely with rallies and, of course, Hasbara efforts, educational campaigns in the community and all sorts of other things, because, you know, when you feel under pressure, we feel under pressure with you. Let me just ask you on a personal level, how did you cope with this latest series of violence, and how have Israelis reacted to the attacks from Gaza? What's your observations on this?
Thank you, Philip. First of all, I want to say I'm excited to be here. It feels a little bit like I'm there in Australia, and I have such fond memories, both of my high school years in Canberra High School, when I got to know the Australian people and the Jewish community as a youngster, and so much of what I've become has a lot to do with what I learned there. So I'm thrilled to be here on that level, and for us to go on in our dialogue and work together. I feel the gap of the distance is becoming very short, and thank God for Zoom too. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and in some way it's a relief to be with you. It feels like a little break in the everyday tension of being here in Israel, in this pressure cooker of the Middle East. So I don't even know, some of us call it a war. We have been in 2 weeks of getting up in the middle of the night, hearing sirens and going down to the shelter with all the other neighbors. I live in a building with 8 families that we sat together in 67, in 73, and then in the Lebanon war. And then, you know, the sound of a siren for an Israeli is piles of trauma, really, of memories and fear and worry. And I hope and when we hear an ambulance in the street or a motorcycle, everybody gets, you know, you stop for a minute and trying to think if it's a siren or not. So it was hard in Tel Aviv, where we are not used to the missiles every week, and of course much worse near the Gaza Strip and in Ashkelon and Ashdod, where they're still not living normal life. And of course, at the same time, my heart is also with the kids and mothers and people in the Gaza Strip that are not part of this violent attack, and that they are living in such a terrible, I don't even know how to call it, circumstances. So in some ways, it was scary. There's a feeling more and more from decade to decade that a war is not something that you find in the border by soldiers, but it's everywhere, and it comes in the middle of the night through the window, and it's much more difficult to protect yourself because there's no place that is completely out of danger. And the conflict, it's like another round where I'm extremely grateful to the Israeli army, to Ribono Shel Olam, and to the people that developed the ways that stop the missiles on the way. But I am afraid that it did not advance any kind of solution, where the people in Israel and the people, Palestinians, I think the normal people are so ready to find some solution of living side by side in two states or in some other way, and stop wasting so many precious lives and money. So I feel that it's a very good thing that we have the opportunity to talk between us inside the community, and for me to explain as much as I can what it looks like and what it feels like from the inside. Of course, I'm not an expert, I'm not in the army, and I can only talk as a civilian, but there was no move that was done. You know what? I'll rephrase this. Do you want me to stop for a minute and you want to ask, or I'll go?
No, keep going. It's interesting.
I'll just say that a minute before the missile started shooting, there was a week of hope that the politics in Israel might be finding a new avenue of some kind of center of a new government. And I'm on the Yesh Atid side. So a new government of young people, both from Likud, from Yesh Atid, from Labor, from other places, that are going to build a good professional government. And then two moves happened. One, the police went up to the Temple Mount, and one, some Knesset members made a kind of an office in Sheikh Jarrah. Now, I don't want to speak as a politician on one of the sides, but the fact is that these two political moves started in Ramadan, the holy holiday of Ramadan. How will I phrase it? I'm not sure it was the best move to build trust and peace. And I am afraid, or some of the people in Israel are afraid, that it was an intentional political move. Well, and then once it starts, we are all in the same boat.
Well, I'll come to that a bit later, where the politics is of course, crucial to this, but that was an interesting segue. Let me ask you, though, just as a follow-up, do you believe that you said you've been through a lot of conflicts? Do you believe the Israeli people are as resilient today, as committed to the Zionist project, to defending our country as they were in 67, in 73, in Lebanon, and in Intifada campaigns? What's your sense of that?
In some ways, I'll be honest, the kind of Zionism that I remember from Australia, that is the classic mainstream Zionism, is going through some kind of, I don't know how, getting tired from again and again being in conflict and feeling that something needs to be done in a different way. At the same time, the resilience of this is our home, we're going to stay here and build it and make it the best place for a state of Jews, that the Jews will have a homeland, and the art and culture and the streets are full of people that were so longing to just have a normal cup of coffee with friends in the street after a year of COVID and then this war. We are here. Sunday we meet. That I remember in Australia, Sunday is a kind of a day of leisure. This is midday, and my son just left for the army this morning. We are there. There's no question. It's a precious place to live in. I feel so fortunate to live in a Jewish country, although I had a very good life when I lived in the diaspora too. So I'm not sure there's a question about resilience, but there is questioning about the way, and maybe it's not a good idea to do the same thing and look and wait for different consequences.
Okay, interesting. And you touched on this a bit, Ruth, so I want to explore it a bit further. One of the very disturbing features of this latest outbreak of violence was to see a serious, as I see it at least, deterioration in relations between the Israeli Arab community, including violence which led to the death of some Israelis. Right. The attitude of Israeli Arabs to the state of Israel as a Jewish state has always been a very sensitive and complex issue. How do you see this situation at the moment? Has this latest conflict led to a breakdown in relations, or did it just illustrate the fact that the whole idea of a genuine peaceful coexistence is perhaps merely a dream? What can be done to genuinely improve relations, or is it really not feasible?
First of all, I'm an optimist by birth, so I think it's possible, and I think we are on our way there. You're right that never before did we see violence in the street to the length of lynch of both Jews and Arabs. It was very scary. My daughter lives in Jaffa, and cars were burned in the street, and it was frightening to go outside. That never happened, I think, since 48, that the roads were not safe and the streets were not quiet, and you don't want your child to go downstairs. That was really very scary. At the same time, last Sunday was the holiday of Shavuot, and we traditionally at Alma do a very big Tikkun Leil Shavuot, all-night study festival, and we couldn't do it live, so we moved to online, to Zoom, and we invited some Palestinian Arab thinkers to take part. And the conversations were very profound and very important and good. I think it's important for us to see our side, but also to think about what it is to be an Arab in a Zionist nation state of Jews. So again, I will say that I'm a Zionist. There's no question about it, and I think that we deserve, and we don't have any other option but having a state of Jews. And my parents that came from Germany and from Bulgaria, there was no other option. And I was in the army. My father was in the army. My son is in the army. We will fight for it to be a safe place for us. I do think that although Israel was built as a homeland for Jews, and it is a nation state, meaning the language is Hebrew, the calendar is Jewish, the school system is Jewish, the public space celebrates Jewish holidays and Jewish time and music and the radio and on the television. If you are, as I'm sure all the people that are with us today remember, that when they come to visit, if it's Hanukkah, you can't miss it. It's everywhere. You can't not see sufganiyot in every cafe. And if you go to buy some groceries and it's 6 p.m, there will be a candle lighting by the cucumbers. I did stop for a minute to think what it feels like to be an Arab Muslim when everything is in Hebrew. And I think that the big challenge or the big issue is for them to feel maybe in the option of a two-state solution when they will have a nation state of their own. And then even the Palestinians that decide to stay in Israel, that is a Jewish nation state, if they will feel that we see them, that they have a voice, that they are treated as equal, that they can celebrate their culture, most of the Arab Israelis, I believe, are happy to be part of the country. They want a democratic Jewish state. But they want like I wanted when I lived in the States or in Australia. I wanted to, if I'm a minority, to be a respected, accepted, even celebrated minority, because there's a lot that they can add to Israeli culture, and they do. Once I started studying Arabic as a Talmudic scholar, it's such richness, and the language is such a cousin of Hebrew, that I think there's a lot we can do within Israel to, even with the signs on the roads, the new, all kinds of things, to let them feel that they are 20% of our citizens. But that does not say that I am willing in any way to give up this place as a homeland of Jews. Israel is a Jewish democratic state. I don't like to say Jewish state. I want to say state of Jews, because states don't have religions and cultures, but the people do. And we worked and suffered so many years to have a homeland that this is not a question. I do believe that most Arab Israelis, like most Jews in the world, are willing to be good citizens that give their best to the country. They just want us to be more sensitive and to work less from fear. And I respect fear. There's a reason to fear, but to work, when we have the power, to work less from fear and more from some kind of generosity, of there's a place for all of us together here.
Okay, in relation to that, and I'll come to some more pure political questions, but now that you've raised it, do you think the potential for Ram, the Arab party, to be part of a government is a game changer in this context? Would you trust them, for want of a better term, and I don't use it pejoratively, but would you trust them as part of a government of Israel?
Again, I'm talking as a citizen now. I don't have responsibility for a party, but I trust them like I trust any other politician. The fact that they are of Arab origin, that they're Muslim, doesn't make them more or less trustworthy. What I worry about Ram is that I think they broke the code. They found the code of Shas in Israel, of the ultra-Orthodox parties. And they are on the way to join the government in a way that says, we don't care about the state. We don't want anything to do with you. Just give us the money and we'll give you our votes. And if that will happen, we might, God forbid, have not only 20% of ultra-Orthodox citizens that get money from the government, but do not give service of any kind, not community, not national, and not army service, and in many ways don't pay taxes, don't take part in the general effort. And so all the other citizens carry them on our shoulders. If now we have 20% of Arab Israelis in the same deal, it will be very difficult for the taxpayers and army service goers to take 40% of the citizens of the state on our shoulders. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's my worry with Ram, not the fact that they are Arabs. The fact that they are a Zionist. They don't want to destroy the country. They want to use the country, the state. And that worries me. It's a system that we made up. The historic Mapai and the Likud of our last 20 years, it's a political method where the person in power gets a lot of seats in parliament and only gives money, and it is not so expensive for them. But what the state pays for it, I think, is very expensive.
Okay, very interesting. as was outlined in your bio, you're a Yesh Atid member of Knesset. Unfortunately or fortunately for just one term, and maybe you'll say a little bit about that, from 2013 to 2015, during which you made a big splash at the beginning when you set up a Bet Midrash in the Knesset, which sadly I believe is no longer functioning. Israel, and this is no secret, is currently in a state of complete political paralysis. The 4 elections has clearly done nothing to resolve. Many people blame the voting system, others Prime Minister Netanyahu, some decry the notions of so many different parties, and lots of other potential explanations. On the other hand, one could say that the inability of any party or group to create a majority is simply a reflection of the fact that Israel is made up still, and you talk about this, of many tribes, different political, religious, and ethnic streams, which more or less can't represent a majority view. You said in 2021, I believe, in relation to the previous election campaign, the current election campaign and its results, unfortunately, prove that the question of the identity of the state is stuck. And with it, we are also stuck. Elected members of the public are still divided between imagined left and right. I'm interested in that term, and do not ask the right questions. They do not progress in formulating the identity of the state and returning to the Declaration of Independence, for example. Mm-hmm. What is your take on how, in fact, this quagmire, this deadlock can be resolved, and how can the country move forward?
Wow, quite a question you have. First of all, I want to say, although I'm in Yesh Atid, I don't think that Netanyahu is the blame. Is to blame for everything. I think he's a very talented, serious person that gives his heart for the country for so many years, and I respect him. My father used to be a Likudnik, and I remember how much he respected Netanyahu, and so I don't think it's a good way to go about to say someone is responsible for everything. I don't think so. I want to connect the Bet Midrash that I started in the Knesset with my answer about coalition. But before that, I want to say about the tribes, the different tribes in the country. I really don't like this. It was a famous lecture by our president about the 4 tribes: Arab, religious, secular, and modern, what was the Dati Leumi, and religious,
national religious. Yeah.
Yes. I don't feel that I live in a tribe. I'm a Jew. And in every synagogue in the world that I've ever walked into, I feel at home. And I remember in Australia, and then we went to New Zealand, and I remember how hard we walked from one place to the other. We got to like 9 at night. I was so hungry. And then a Chabad Rebbe walked up to me and said, "Are you hungry? Do you want chicken?" and fed me. And I remember my thinking, it doesn't matter if I will have a very serious dispute with Chabad in my community here. They are the Chabad rabbis, and we don't see eye to eye in how to celebrate the holiday. But that makes me in his tribe, not out of his tribe. I don't want Jews to have different tribes, and I'm also not fond of streams, Reform, Conservative, or Reconstructionist. I mean, it's okay if it works as education and synagogues, and of course, things in Israel, things in the diaspora are different. But I don't want us to become different tribes. We are one tribe of Jews, and in my life I might change some opinions and live in different ways, and I feel I belong to any Jew. Now the political question. Why am I saying that the Bet Midrash has to do with a way to form a coalition? The Israeli politics, and it's very different from American and I think Australian, is built on not on two big, like Republicans and Democrats in America, two big parties, but it works on coalition of small parties. And that, I believe, is a Talmudic concept that says it is better for you and me to have a dispute and go back and forth for some time, because the answer we'll find after this kind of a dialogue will be better than the one we come with in the beginning. If I will win or you will win and you'll have your way, it will not be as good as the way we'll come to if we have a dispute, a machloket, a serious, respectful, machloket l'shem shamayim, respectful dispute for the sake of heaven. Now, the politics of Israel makes the prime minister build a coalition of 2 to 7 little parties, or big and little parties together, and they have to go into this kind of discussions and disputes, and only when they all agree they can they form a government. And I think for the state, once they do come to some kind of a middle ground, it is usually a better middle ground than the one far left or far right that they would come to the table to start with. So that's why when I had a Bet Midrash in the Knesset, I thought it's relevant to the work for us to study from our sages, from Chazal, how to do it, because you see the Talmud behind me. That what they were dealing with is how to take care of a community. And so many things that I had to decide or think about in the Knesset, I went to take counsel from them.
But Chaval, there's no Bet Midrash anymore, and there's no government. So
that's more Chaval.
How do we move forward, having regard to all of that, those good sentiments and that positive theory?
About the Bet Midrash, I think Chaver Knesset Gilad Kariv from the Reform Party, I think he's going to set up something similar. The fact that our movement of Jewish, Israeli Jewishness, or Itchadshut Yehudit, the Jewish Renaissance, there are many of us, and some of us have been to Knesset already, and I hope we are going to come in the future. And the whole concept of pluralistic Judaism is more and more heard in the rooms of the Knesset. What can we do to go forward? I believe that we can build a central government. There is a challenge today with the fact that the prime minister is on trial. I think and I hope that, and today, this morning, there was optimistic talk that still there might be a central new government that Yair Lapid will be able to form, because I don't think the people of Israel are divided to two. That's not my feeling. In America, recently, before COVID, I visited, and some people told me, I would rather my son will bring home a non-Jew than a Republican. And I was like, oh my goodness, I don't believe I heard that. In Israel, you have very strong sentiments, but Friday night, you sit with your family, and one is on the right, and one is on the left, and one is religious, and one is secular, and it doesn't feel that yet. Politics, maybe I'm fooling myself and trying to stay an optimist, but I do believe that the question, what I wrote in that article, is that the real question is the identity of the state. And to remember that it was founded in the Declaration of Independence as Bait Leumi La'am HaYehudi Be'eretz Yisrael, a national homeland for the Jewish people in the land of Israel, and that it's democratic and Jewish. They did not write that it's a religious state. They said that it's a state for the Jewish nation, for all the Jews in the world. And by the way, your voice as Australian Jews, as diaspora Jews, is so necessary for the building of Israel, for keeping it alive and going forward. And you're very much missed in the last year in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and everywhere. and in our minds. So I believe that once we talk about the identity of the state and remind ourselves that this is what it is, we are all on the same side.
It's interesting you say that, but take two recent examples. The Labour Party decided that they were no longer going to be part of a coalition because they felt that it had weakened their ability to stand for something, that perhaps coalitions dissipated ideology and principles to such an extent that they could no longer have any impact. Benny Gantz, who said he would not join with Bibi for a long time, ended up joining. I think he now must regret that decision. Politically, I think it ended up being a disaster for him. So I guess the contrary view would be, Ruth, that while coalitions sound like they bring more people together and they move to the center and it's good for the country, the problem perhaps is, though, it creates political paralysis and it doesn't enable. I mean, we don't have an ambassador in Australia, an Israeli ambassador, since the last one went home. I'm not sure, with all these outstanding success of the Abraham Accords, for example, many parts of the foreign ministry are not functioning properly. I believe the same with the finances, the treasury of Israel. Without a functioning government, we can have lots of debates about, tribes and the essence of the nature of the country, but the people need to be able to be governed by a proper government.
You're completely right. There's no better way. There's no easy way to say this. I was sure, like a week before this war, that it's finally going to end and there's a new government. There is the issue of the prime minister himself, and it's personal in many ways for many people that got hurt working with him, and I think that will change eventually. I think our status of foreign ministry is very weak. We have been saying this since I was in the Knesset, and I think that's I'm so sorry about that. I think so much of our strength is our connection with you, the Jews that don't live in Israel. And I'm not sure that the government understands how important that is. I can't say, I can't comfort. If we won't have a government in a month or so, we are really in a very big challenge. I think the Arabs around us felt that, and that's why this war started, by the way. One of the things that, like, maybe we are weak and they can now use this moment of weakness. When you talk, I worry. I think you're seeing things very straight. There's no way for a state to be without a head. And there is, like, if it was a BBC drama, there's a very dramatic season going on with a strong leader that is not willing to let go. And the people that worked with him don't want to work with him. What?
Do you think another election is a possibility, even though everybody said in the past there would never be another election?
Because it is a possibility, I feel they're working day and night to try and form a coalition. And the question is whether Abbas will be able to join a Zionist coalition while he couldn't do it when there were missiles in the air. And Bennett is the big question. One day he says this and the other day he says that. I don't envy his position now, but these are the two players that can make it happen in a few hours. Everything is ready. I must say that I appreciate Yair Lapid that I worked with, and for the leadership and the guts and the resilience that he became completely white, but he is doing. I'm very impressed with his leadership, I must say. Even I'm not objective about him, but I'm really impressed.
Okay, so a related question, the democracy of Israel,
yes.
you emphasized that earlier. I understand in 2020, you made some comments which I was quite depressed when I read them. I wonder if you still believe in them, but I believe you said, I feel that democracy is in danger in Israel. I do feel that the court is in danger. the separation of powers is in danger. This summer, and I think you were talking in 2020, I felt something I'd never felt before. There's a chance we will break up. There's a smell of divorce in the air. The corona does not contribute to the situation. The fears have intensified. Everyone is a little more on the edge. It's sad and disturbing. And in answer to that, what to do, you said, study Torah. Now, I'm sure the rabbis on the call tonight will agree with you. But for the rest of us, for the Amcha, tell us why studying Torah will overcome these issues that you are so concerned about.
Thank you for finding this piece. I remember it. What I actually did is I took a flag of Israel and put it on my broomstick and went downstairs to the crossroad. And we stood in this crossroad next to home for the whole summer and fall, every Saturday night. And in the beginning, a few cars would, how do you say, honk? And later, yes, more and more and more until, you know, they would wave, and there was a feeling that people are as worried as we were. That happened because I felt the court was being undermined or threatened. When I say we should study Torah, I mean that in our ancient books, first of all, they know exactly how the power should be divided, and the king should not rule the court, and the court should not rule the government, and the three powers should be separated. And also, when I say to study Torah, I mean we must remember that behind or underneath our differences, we are standing on the same ground, and our common ground is Torah. We come from the story of Abraham leaving his father and his world in Lech Lecha. We come from being slaves that free themselves to go to a new country. We come from the same story from Baba Batra, from how to find big issues in little solutions. And when we study Torah, the differences kind of find their right size, because the thing that keeps us together, that brought us to this moment together, is much greater than the difference of how to run democracy. And I think every time you study Torah, when you go back to this moment, your decisions are a little sharper and more, you get perspective, especially when you study with someone that comes from a completely different world, but studies in the same way. And, you know, we can study the same Rashi and think the same thoughts. I don't feel that in the ultra-Orthodox world, people don't understand what's important. I don't feel that Arab Israelis are all against us. It's not, we are not divided to good and bad people. Politics should be a methodology of running the place. It shouldn't be the war of identities. The identity should be educated towards what you do in the Jewish schools, in the youth movements, and in the community. In some ways, there's a lot to learn from that. I believe, and that's why I work in education and in culture, to work with, not just with the educators, to work with the artists, with the people who are writing shtisel. I don't know if you watch it there, with the people who are making the music, who are doing the theater and writing the books and the poetry. Once they are full of this content, and when the people know where they come from and where we are going, I believe the other solutions, even if there are very strong egos in the middle and a lot of tension of Iran pushing us from the side. Iran is behind all of this many times. I feel once we stay together and know who we are and why this country was built or founded, we will find a way to build another government, I hope without a fifth election.
You did say you were an optimist, Ruth, and that's coming through very clearly. Someone mentioned in the chat, we love Shtisel. It's true. It's a very popular series here in Australia, as are many Israeli TV and shows and movies. I want to come to a bit more to secular study of Torah, but Helen Shardy's asked an interesting question, more of a technical one. As we know, the threshold to be for a party to sit in the Knesset was increased, and we thought that may change situations. Micro parties would disappear. It doesn't seem to have quite worked that way. Do you think if the threshold was increased again, perhaps 5% or some other number, this would improve the chances of forming governments or not?
That's a big question, because it's always like the pros and cons of making it easier but losing on democracy. When you have power in politics, you always have to take care of the minorities to have a voice, to be able to talk. And once you increase the threshold too much, they disappear. And it's good for you when you are with the strong ones, but it's not good for you when you are. And I always remember that I was also a Jew in the minority in my life, or my mother was, or my father was. So I know that politics is a seesaw. It's up and down. And so you should build a rule that will work for you both when you're up and you're down. I was in the government when we raised it a little bit. I'm not sure that we would like to change it in such a way that will make an impact big enough to form a government. I think we are in a historical moment where once Benjamin Netanyahu will finish his service to the country, we do see a whole new scene of a much bigger center. It used to be left and right, but now Lieberman and Bennett and Lapid and some of the Gantz, it's really, and Likud.
Gidon Sar.
And Gidon Sar, of course, who, by the way, his daughter stars in a wonderful new series that I'm sure you'll see soon. And she looks so much like him that I started liking him politically. Because she makes
What's it called? What's the series?
It's called Hamefakedet, the officer. She's an officer of girls, amazing. So anyway, you suddenly, there is a center that we didn't have before, that is center right. And Merav Michaeli, a wonderful, a good friend that used to study at Alma from Labour Party, can join it. And then we find a new kind of Israeli politics that is not the left with the Arabs or the right with the religious, but something more central, when the religious parties can take part but not make the rules and own the whole government. So that's the avenue of my optimism.
Okay, very interesting. Turning now to the things you do for a day job. You're deeply committed to exposing secular Israelis to the study of Torah, and that infuses everything you do. It's very clear from all of your achievements and activities. Why do you consider it important? And how do you divorce or separate the study of religious texts from adhering to Orthodox Jewish practice without rendering such study into just an academic pursuit, as with any other subject? Or if I put it another way, can or should the study be infused with religious meaning without an accompanying belief in God, Torah, and Halakha?
Philip, I want to thank you for your beautiful questions. I want to write them down because they're so, I see how much you thought of everything. I love Torah. First of all, I love Torah, and I think I inherited this love and respect from both my parents, who were both secular. My mother secular in the German Jewish style, and my father secular in the Bulgarian Spanish Jewish style. But these books for me are not just religious texts. They were written in a religious world, but I am connected to them in a few ways. First, like an Englishman is connected to Shakespeare, or a Russian to Tolstoy, and just to know your great books as a person that lives in a culture and respects our culture, I think every Jew should know the whole bookshelf, not just those books, but the whole thing, including today's literature and poetry and writing and theater and television. So the first thing is that I just want to know where I come from. The second thing is that secular Judaism, meaning Judaism of people that don't want the power to be in the hands of what used to be the church for Christians or the rabbis for Jews, the law shouldn't be in their hands, health shouldn't be in their hands, economy shouldn't be held in their hands. That's the secular revolution. And being secular, meaning I'm not halachic and I'm not rabbinic, I don't live under rabbinic authority, doesn't mean that I'm not celebrating all the holidays, living in Hebrew, studying Torah, and educating towards it. Secular Judaism is not like the English way of saying it. I have nothing to do with it. Secular means I love it, I live in it. I'm grateful that that the school system is Jewish, that the radio is Jewish, television is Jewish, that Hebrew is the language, that the calendar that we live under is Jewish, and when you pray for the rain, it's the time of rain, and when you light candles in Hanukkah, it's cold and dark outside. I think that for the whole Jewish people, and maybe more than 50% of it is secular, it doesn't make sense to disconnect ourselves from the past, from what made us ourselves. Now, having said that, the fact that my father, my beloved father, Zichrono Livracha, was a Spanish, I don't know if it sounds too harsh, but chauvinist man, and I'm his daughter, and I love him, and I respect him, and I feel that I'm loyal to him, but I'm a feminist. So I'm not going to go back to his letters and change the words. I can't change the way he and my mother built their life between them. But I can say I am the next generation, and what I learned from them, I'm trying to do to the best of my abilities, and I'm sure that my children will learn from me and will do what they think is the best to their abilities. So studying texts that were written in a world where women did not have a voice and couldn't study, and doesn't mean that I have to live like this. It means that I have to know it and take all the wisdom out of it. When I read Talmud, I read it as a man. I don't read it as the wife. And but I try to make it relevant, to make it alive, to try to understand what they're saying to me, like to go to your grandparents and ask for advice. They are not going to tell me what to do, what they did in First World War, but their advice might help me for tomorrow. Did I explain myself?
No, very interesting. So do I take from that you don't necessarily have to be a religious believer? For instance, you could study Talmud, Gemara, Mishnah, and not necessarily believe in God. You don't think that's relevant to the study?
I will say it in two ways. One is that if you study Greek mythology, you don't necessarily believe in Zeus, but you know your stories and they affect your life. I do have a relationship with God myself. I do not live in the halachic world at all. I don't feel that that's the way to be connected to God. I hope there is a God, but I'm not, I don't know. I do have the ability to pray in very special times of my life. I would not do it in public usually unless I come to visit the synagogue. But many of my colleagues and students are not religious, and they can be wonderful scholars. And I'm sure that the Torah and Ribonot Shel Olam, if they exist, is very happy with them. They can be great contributors to Torah. It's the ongoing conversation that started from Abraham and God and goes on until we talk here now. And anyone who is willing and wishing to take part is invited to take part.
And how is it going? I know you get lots of people, Tikkun Leil Shavuot. I know you've, for instance, collaborated with Rav Benny Lau on many panels in this context. But are more and more secular Israelis interested in this? Are they? What's happening in the Israeli schools? Are they learning more about this?
Yes, much more of it is coming into the public sphere. I just met with two very famous Israeli artists who are going to renew their vows after 45 years of marriage, and they asked me to build together the ceremony. The Israeli school system has changed since Shai Piron was the Minister of Education and I was working with him, and there's much more study of Jewish content on top of a lot of Bible study that we always had, and Hebrew study that is the given. So when you worry about Israelis not being educated enough, you must remember that we live in the Jewish Truman Show. You know, everything you are in a bubble. Everything is Jewish here. You can't miss a holiday. You can't forget it's Shabbat. You can't forget your Hebrew. You study poetry and literature that is all echoing and quoting scripture from before. So although kids do not go to Jewish school, the state is a state of Jews. So the school, the public school, is in many ways Jewish. Not Jewish in the way that you used to in the diaspora. They don't speak Yiddish. They do not, to come up to read it, Torah is not the anchor of the way they connect, but they can quote, they can make fun of or make new songs of Bible or Mishnah or Piyut. They live, I feel we are marinated in it. And for me, it's a very high Jewish standard of living. It's a good way to live as a Jew. Although again, wouldn't mind to spend some time in Australia again, but for the people, the ocean, the food, the quiet, I'm sure that all of the people that are with us today know and remember when you come visit here, you're at home. And the feeling of being at home in the street, understanding all the little jokes of quotes, the take on the take of the song is a very rich kind of living.
Yeah, well, you actually, I see here also in 21, you said in relation to this, the time has come for us to take over the wedding ceremony, including the ketubah in Hebrew, and have it conducted by one of our people. I dare to offer, like the kibbutz society, to also learn to accompany a person to his afterlife and manage the burial ourselves. It is worth emphasizing the strong voice in Jewish secularism in Israel opposes any connection to Jewish sources or rituals. This anxiety, this resistance, the anxiety of religion produces ignorance and helplessness. Now, you've made this point very well, I think, tonight in the Israeli context. What do you say about the applicability of it in our world, in the diaspora? Does it translate the same way without that whole framework, that misgeret, which is so Jewish, that we don't have in Melbourne or New York or Paris or wherever?
Right. A lot of what I learned in Canberra in the conservative shul, that I learned a lot of how does it work? How does the community keep together? And I think one of the genius inventions of Jewish culture is the community and the synagogue that holds you and you hold in the diaspora. And so I have a lot of respect for that. And if I live outside of Israel, I do belong to a community. At the same time, I believe that so many what is called unaffiliated Jews would be interested and connected through study and culture. And that if we would have the ability to educate intellectuals like the rabbis of the different streams, they would be very effective in giving the majority of the Jewish world, who are usually not affiliated, a way to live and celebrate their Jewishness, educate their kids as Jews, and connect to their identity. And I'm afraid in the Jewish state, until today, we still don't have any, we don't get resources from the government, from the country. We pay our taxes, but we are not considered a legitimate Jewish way. There is, again, beginning of light. The Minister of Culture, Tropper, helped us at Alma, maybe for the first time. And so maybe this is a beginning. And if donors in the world also will understand that strengthening secular Jewish educators will strengthen the big amount of secular Jewish people, maybe the next generation will make a big step forward.
Okay, well, that's a wonderful segue to my last question. We only have a couple of minutes, Ruth, and then Bren will wind us up because it's 9 o'clock on the dot, or 2 o'clock your time. But related to that, much discussion about the ever widening gap between Jews of the diaspora and Israel, particularly younger Jews. In the US and parts of Europe, it seems to us at least that many Jews are much less connected religiously, culturally, and politically with Israel. And while we in Australia still have a very strong, as you've said, and you know it.
And I saw with my own eyes.
You saw it. There's still a very strong emotional connection with the state of Israel. It's, to be honest, a little secret just between us. It's not what it was 20 or 30 years ago in Australia either. So do you agree from all of your, your contact with people in the diaspora and your travels that there is a weakening? And if so, how do you see it being strengthened?
I'll give a short answer because we can start a whole hour from this. I think what you said before about the foreign ministry is a tragedy, and we are not doing a good enough job in explaining what's going on here and what's happening to us. And the kids in universities are fighting a very hard war of explaining themselves vis-a-vis their colleagues. I was teaching last year at Harvard, at the law school, and I saw what the campus is, what's going on campus, and it's very difficult, especially when you're 20-something, to answer. I believe that it's a very different world, but I believe the world of Jewish culture, and not just religion, could be effective and very inviting to many young Jews in the world. And we haven't done enough work there. The fact that people are watching Shtisel without a school, without anyone pushing them to do so, just because it's good. And once you watch it, you think about it, and you think about Orthodoxy, and you think about Jewishness. Well, when people watch Fauda, to do good culture, you don't need to subsidize people to watch it. They watch it, they read poetry, they read fiction, they go to the theater because they want meaning in their life. And so I would invest in good Jewish, Israeli, both Orthodox, but also secular culture, because I think that could be a common ground like Torah was for recent generations.
Okay, Ruth, I think that's a wonderful way to finish. It's been a delight talking to you tonight again. It's been a while since
Thank you very much, Philip.
Thank you so much for giving some of
your
I'm so such interesting thoughts to our community, and B'hatzlacha for everything in Israel. We watch, we hope things will remain quiet. No more time in the bomb shelters.
Be well and come visit soon.
When we can visit, we're not allowed out of our country. Soon, hopefully we can.
We'll wait.
You're on the first plane. Over to you.
I'll be waiting.
Well, politics, Arab-Jewish coexistence, secular religious coexistence, Israeli diaspora relations, Torah, electoral constitutionalism, and even TV shows. That really was as wide-ranging and as fascinating as I thought it would be. So thank you so much, Ruth and Philip, for tonight's conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I know so many other people in the community did as well. So thanks again for your time tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad that we feel so close, although there are a few kilometers and oceans between us.
Well, the power of the internet at least breaks down some of those kilometers.
The internet and the Jewish heart.
Indeed, indeed. For everyone else, please mark in your calendar the 20th of June at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. We are hosting another former MK. This time it will be Errol Margalit. Errol is one of the people behind Startup Nation, the founder of Jerusalem Venture Partners, and a social entrepreneur. And you can register for that conversation by going to www.zfa.com.au/conversations. And of course, we will send you an email encouraging you to join up. Can I wish everyone a wonderful week, a safe week, both here and in Israel.
Amen.
And I will see you next time. Good night.
לילה טוב.